All right, gang. Welcome aboard. It's time for the weekly Mac Forum video chat. It's the October 30th edition. No, I didn't plan any scary Halloween pranks or anything like that, so no need to be afraid. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Last week, we lost the feed midway the show. So, what I did is I went back and kind of reprised some of the information and then added a couple of new things for this week. And the tips, the iOS tips this week, are the ones that I would have brought to you last week had I not had to pull that video. So, without any further ado, I want to say welcome to our newest member, Martha Herzog. And Martha, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name there. Um, and I want to mention also to anyone that might check out the forum during the coming week, um, if you want to be a member, if you want to post a question rather, then the way to do that is to become a member. If you just want to lurk and read the answers and kind of check things out, you don't have to become a member. But if you are interested in asking a question and maybe getting an answer, then the way to do that is to become a member. Doesn't cost you anything unless you choose to become a premium member, which one of the perks of that is it allows you to see the forum without some of the ads, etc. So go ahead and check that out over the coming week. I want to go ahead and get going into this week's information. First of all, this is a tip from last week. Our member Curly Mac asked a question about the best way to share family albums, photo albums. And this is because they're in a situation in their household where they have a Mac, an iPad, a PC, iPhone, the whole gamut, okay? And wondering about the easiest way to have that information, those photos shared without having to have them stored on, various devices and that kind of thing. And the general consensus in that thread was to use some type of cloud-based service. For example, iCloud is one of them, but there are others. Amazon has some cloud-based service and space available. And there are some links in the thread to some other helpful information, such as a couple of sites where you can kind of consolidate things. You could, I suppose, use Dropbox for this. And as I mentioned last week, personally, I miss the old mobile me setup for file sharing and the like, because one of the things that it would easily allow me to do is to set up private folders that someone could only see the contents of said folder if they had the password or if I shared the link with them. And I kind of miss that function. There are some other cloud-based services that have similar functionality now. I just kind of like the way Apple did that. Hate to see that service go bye-bye. Um, Also, coming up in this is another tip from last week. Our member MVP 17 David was having an issue with right clicks and command clicks not working correctly in Mac Forum. And he eventually traced this down to a particular plug-in, or not plug-in, but site tracker type device. And I have a link to that thread. It's part of the fact that knowing that some of these beacons and trackers may cause problems sometimes. This is not something that I had thought to look for uh, as a potential source of these kinds of issues. But I suppose that if the tracker is not functioning particularly well, it could cause these kinds of problems. So it's just one more thing to have a look at um, if your web browser is not behaving correctly on certain websites. Many of our members are using Ghostery to kind of deal with these types of blockers, of trackers rather. All right, and also at the time we did the show last week, the Apple event had not occurred. The October 27th Apple event had not occurred at that time. It had been announced already. It did go off on Thursday, the 27th, as expected, and the rumors were swirling around. A lot of rumors were swirling around as to which devices would be updated, whether there would be an OLED keyboard with an OLED set of function keys. There were some reports that Apple may now be finally ditching USB ports, the standard ones that we see now that we're used to, in favor of USB-C completely, and there's some discussion of that. If you're interested in the forum commentary, I have a link to that. You can see some of the forum commentary that occurred after the event. And the forum commentary, essentially, I know that a couple of our members were somewhat underwhelmed by what was actually announced on Thursday. I'll have that kind of rundown for you. I did not catch the Thursday event, so I've kind of reserved my discussion of that. I haven't really had a chance to catch up on the announcements at that event, but in the discussion of the forum consideration of the Apple event, I saw a post. Dennis Travis linked to a Mac Rumors article about the newer Macs not having the traditional startup chime. If you've been around the Macs, you know that a startup chime of one kind or another, and it's changed over the years, has been around almost from day one. And that chime was an indication that the Mac hardware had passed some very, very basic diagnostic testing. And, periodically we would get people wanting to know how to turn that sound off, how to mute it because they work in acquired environments, all kinds of things. Well, it looks like that is going to be removed completely in the new MacBooks that were announced, and in the new MacBook Pros, rather. And that's led to some mixed feelings. The Mac Rumors site that Dennis linked to, that posting rather, had an overview of what the sound has been like over the last several years. I personally am going to miss that sound, even though I don't reboot my machine very often. There's something reassuring about that sound, particularly if you route your sound through your stereo, and that noise comes up at incredible volumes. I've scared a few people now and again. The old Power Mac 6500 desktops, for example, had a pretty decent speaker in the bottom of it, and having rebooted the machine a couple of times with neighbors or whatever over at the house, sometimes they were a little surprised by how loud that could be if you had the volume cranked up on one of those machines. So there's been some mixed feelings about what's been announced. If you want to keep up with that, check out the forum thread that I'll link to. And speaking of trackers, this is an interesting thread. It started out, as you can see, member Dano50 asking about the pros and cons of using Google Chrome. And over the course of the thread, the discussion has turned more in the direction of how do I block some of these trackers that more and more websites are applying. If you've got one of these anti-tracking tools installed, you may be surprised sometimes at how many different trackers appear on various websites. I linked to this thread because it has some good information about which websites and which web browsers do less of this and which browsers have some tracker blocking built in. Pay particular attention to the post by member Randy B. Singer. As usual, Randy's come through with some very helpful information. For those of you that are interested in blocking the trackers, etc., 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 you might find this thread useful. And I just now realized as I was thinking about this, I still have a book in the studio here about trackers and how they're used and why. It's not a very difficult read, so it might be of interest to some of you that are interested in that. It's a couple years old. I wrote a review of that book when I was writing for about this particular Macintosh. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember the name of it. I'll post a link in the show notes. It actually had an interesting discussion of what you might refer to as big data. In other words, the amount of data that's gathered by all kinds of things now to generate consumption profiles, shopping profiles, all of these kinds of things. So I'll post a link to that as well in case someone's interested in that book. Another thing that has come up this week in the forum is a discussion of the relative merits of the Microsoft Surface devices, and in particular, why it is that Apple has not brought a touchscreen to the MacBook line, MacBook Pro. And this has turned into an interesting discussion on the relative merit of these types of devices that are trying to be, the Surface in some ways is a laptop and in some ways is a tablet type device. And in some of the reviews that I've read, it suggests that it really doesn't do either one well. In the thread, you will see a mention of the fact that some of the commercials for the Surface may be misleading. I am not convinced, and this is from someone who is, I have not, I will fully admit, I have not played with the Surface at this point, any of them. But I'm a little, shall we say, suspicious of the claims that the Surface has the power to do serious computing on a regular basis. Some of the things that the commercial says that it can do, I'm a little curious about. But for those of you that are considering the Surface, this is a thread that you might want to look at. My other problem with the Surface is not specific to the Surface itself. It is that it's twofold. One is that for that type of device to function as both a laptop and a tablet, which is what the commercials lead you to believe that it can do, the OS has to be built for that. And there are some suggestions among Windows 10 users that this is not functioning as well as it could be. What you've got is an OS that is neither fish nor fowl. And that's a part of the issue that I have with it. When you start asking to do these types of things that are very, very different, it can cause some real problems. But the other one is purely a practical matter. I want you to try something the next time you think that a combination laptop, tablet type, surface type gizmo might be the way to go. Either A, go down to a store that sells one and play around with it for a little bit, which I think is a good idea. But also, try the following, especially if you have a laptop. Take your laptop, put it at what would be a comfortable working distance if you were working on the surface, and try touching the screen. Now, I'm not really concerned about the dirt and oil and etc. that would pick up on the screen. I mean, don't touch it hard. Just do that. Reach out to it like you're going to touch it. You don't even have to actually touch the screen. Just reach out like you're going to touch the screen. Now do that for the next 10 or 15 minutes of using your computer. In other words, every time you have to click the mouse or touch the trackpad, reach out like you're having to touch the screen. Okay? I suspect that that's going to get uncomfortable in a very short period of time. It has for me the few times that I've tried something like that. But everybody has their own ideas about what this should be and what the best way to go about it is. All right, and having said that, let's get right into this week's tips and tricks segment. Excuse me, looks like I brought up a link that I hadn't intended to there. There we go. Now we're back where we wanted to be. This is one that I brought up last week. And it is an article, as you can see, from iPhone Life magazine by Sarah Kingsbury about how to turn off the 5 most annoying iOS features in iOS 10. And everybody has a different opinion about which iOS 10 features are annoying, but this involves the 5 that seem to come up most often. The 5 that are discussed in this article have to deal with unlocking the phone without pressing the home button. If you are having trouble sending effects in messages, and I'll demo that tip in just a second. The third one is turning off raise to wake. The fourth one is turning off handwriting recognition in landscape mode. And then number 5 was turning off the iMessage app auto install. Okay, let me explain what that is if you're not familiar with it. And while I'm explaining, I'll go ahead and bring up the little QuickTime movie that I did. Let me just bring that up real quick. With the advent of iOS 10, developers could, if you had an app on your phone, for example, the developer could, now that Messages has been opened up to apps, the developer could install an extension that helped their app work within iMessage. Now, some people do not like that. And certainly do not necessarily want it to occur automatically. So let's take a look and see. I'll show you in this video the one of the things that you can do to control that. Let me go ahead now. The first thing here that I brought this, I'm going to show you right now, is how to create app folders in to group related applications into folders on iOS. This is not new to iOS 10. It's been around a while. Now, as you can see in this section of the video right here, the video, the apps wobble a little bit when I have the video rolling, and they have little X's by them. All I did to get those X's, to get into that mode, is touch one of the apps and hold my finger on it for a second, Don't let go. Don't do anything. When you start to see this wobble, okay, you can move one on top of the other. It takes a little bit of practice. Sometimes it goes real quickly, sometimes it doesn't. As you can see, I had a little difficulty here. But when you move one on top of the other like this, when you get it just right, you create a folder. Now that folder is named games in part because the two things that I put in here are games. You can put several things in here. And then what you want to do, now suppose you decide that you don't like these folders. Now to get to this application to launch it, you just tap the folder and it'll open, and then you tap whichever application you want to open. The behavior that you're used to, this for example occurs with the utilities. That's one folder that's built into iOS 10. Well, this gives you essentially the same behavior. Now as you can see, I've got two apps in here. If I touch my home button, those X's will go away. But what if I decide I'm tired of this arrangement and I want to get rid of the folder? All I have to do is go into the folder, go back into this mode, touch, so I have the X's again, and drag the applications out of the folder. Keep dragging until you don't have, it's going to stay in folder mode as long as you have multiple applications in there. Okay? Now you keep dragging until that comes to a stop. I'm going to back this up a little bit because it's actually part of another tip. Okay. This next tip has to do with turning iMessage, these app notifications, app installations off. Okay, here's how you take care of that if you don't want these apps installed within iMessage. The first thing we're going to do here, we're going to go to settings and go to general and accessibility, and then we're going to scroll down, and I'm going to pick the one that says, oh, this is the one for effects. Turn off the one that says reduce motion. Okay, so you're going into accessibility and change that motion setting. That has an impact on whether you can see effects. So if you have an issue with this, go into general, go into accessibility, and then keep drilling down until you see, I'm looking it up again on my phone, go to accessibility, and then look for that setting that says reduce motion. Now if you don't like the way these effects are displayed, try switching that. If it's set to off, turn it on. If it's set to on, turn it off. Play around with that setting a little bit, see if that fixes your issue with displaying these animated effects. Okay, and finally we get to the third iPhone tip of the evening, which is getting to a point where applications from the iOS message are not automatically installed. For this, I'm going to go in, I'm going to go open up a conversation, open messages, open up a conversation with someone. In this case, I opened up one with myself, but it could be anyone. Okay? Now, the next thing I want to do, as you can see from this menu down at the bottom, on some of your conversations, you may have a little arrow to the left here, and you don't see these three icons on the bottom. If you do, click that little arrow, and those icons should appear. All right, now the next thing you want to do, I'm going to let this video roll forward a bit. The next thing you want to be able to do is click on the one, that A, that leads to the App Store, okay, to the iMessage version of the App Store. So we now essentially have three app stores. And then you want to click on this this set of four circles right here. Okay, Watch what happens when you do that. When you click there, it's going to bring up some options. Choose the one that says Store. That will lead you to the Messages App Store, as you can see. And where you want to go is up here in this corner. Go to Manage. Okay, as you'll see in just a second, go right up to Manage, click there, and you'll see those are some that I already have installed. Now, if I want to automatically install these types of extensions, I'm going to click here so that this setting turns green. If I don't want it, I'm going to set it like this so that it stays white. That way, if with this set this way, the extensions do not automatically get installed. So I thought maybe I would pass that along to you. You can experiment, choose the setting that you find most useful. I personally have that off. I generally like to either go looking for these things myself or want to at least have a lot of control over how they're installed. So that's something for you to keep in mind as you explore iOS 10. We're going to have a lot more in the way of iOS tips, Mac tips, and the like in the coming weeks, and I hope to do these little short video segments to demonstrate some of them. One that I did not get to set up tonight, and I'm not going to try to find a website that does it live here. In the newest incarnation of Safari, that is, in the version that comes with Mac OS Sierra, if you have a tab that is playing a video or an audio clip of some sort, then you have an issue where in the past you would not been able to tell whether that a tab was playing some piece of audio or video. That's changed a little bit in the sense that things now, when they're playing, have a little speaker icon right in the tab. So if this tab had an audio or video playing in the background, the little speaker that would give you an indication of that would be right about here. That's just a good thing to know. Apple, if you are listening, if anybody in Cupertino is listening to this, could you do us all a favor and make the demarcation of the active tab a little more obvious? Some of us are a little clumsy and frequently close the wrong tab because we have a difficult time sometimes telling which tabs are active and which ones are not. I'd appreciate it. If you, as you can tell, if I get in the middle here of one of these tabs, it's really difficult to tell. Right now, I know that the active tab is this last one right here, but that's because I haven't closed the browser. If time had gone by and I had closed the browser, then there would be, I might have a little difficulty telling which one is active. So Apple, under the heading of could you please fix this, give us a more visible way of telling which tabs are the active ones in Safari. All right, guys, that's going to just about do it for this week. We hit it right about on the 30-minute mark here. This is doing pretty good. I hope that you enjoyed this and found the tips useful. If, as happened last week, something went berserk and did not work, I recorded the video for this chat, and I'll upload it probably tomorrow evening if anything has gone wrong and it doesn't upload. So I'll take care of that by tomorrow. And as usual, the show notes will be available in the forum thread. I'll have a link to that as well. And I hope you enjoyed this week, and I enjoyed bringing it to you. I hope that to see you in the forum, and until next week, this is your host, Sylvester Rock, aka Sly Dude. Thank you for having me, and I'll see you in the forum.